Hello, and welcome to Visible Cities, Invisible Cities. My name is Michael Miller, and on behalf of the 3,400 writers, translators, and editors of PEN, it's our great pleasure to welcome you in the 8th Annual PEN World Voices of International Literature. I'd like to take a moment to thank the festival sponsors and supporters, without whose generosity none of this would be possible, as well as the Standard and the Public Theater, which are serving as the festival's hubs this year. I'd also like to thank the more than 100 volunteers who have given their time to help us. There are many more festival events for you to attend. You can find the complete schedule of events at worldvoicesfestival.org. Videos and photos of events will be posted online as soon as tomorrow. Don't forget to add your name to our sign-up sheet at the membership table to receive our e-newsletter and stay current on all PEN events. The 2013 World Voices Festival has brought together writers from across the globe to explore bravery in art, politics, and personal life. Over the course of the week, we will examine writers' impacts on political transformation in recent global hotspots such as Burma, Palestine, South Africa, Haiti, and Guantanamo Bay, as well as honor those small acts of bravery displayed in everyday life. Books will be available for sale at the table outside, where the authors will be available to sign copies after the event. Before I introduce each of our guests, please turn off all things in your possession which beep, ring, buzz, play musical tunes, or squeal. If you think you have turned them off, there's always one. So go on, take a moment, check again. With that, I will introduce the panelists today. We have Dror Burstein, who was born in 1970 in Netanya, Israel. He lives in Tel Aviv, where he teaches at Tel Aviv University. He's worked as an editor for Israel Radio's classical music station, as a freelance writer of literary and art reviews. He has been awarded both the Bernstein Prize, 2005, and the Prime Minister's Prize in 2006. He's the author of the novels Kin and the forthcoming Netanya. Next we have Barbara Frischmuth, who was born in 1941 and lives in Steiermark, Austria. She studied Turkish, Hungarian, and Middle Eastern studies. She works as a writer, translator, and columnist. She has won numerous prizes for her work, and her books include the novel Where We Came From. Dror Burstein was born, Michal Ajvaz is a Czech novelist, poet, and translator. Currently, he works as a researcher at Prague's Center for Theoretical Studies. His novel Empty Streets was awarded the Jaroslav Seifert Prize for Literary Achievement in 2005, the most prestigious literary award in the Czech Republic. He's also the author of The Other City and the fantastical travelogue The Golden Age, which is forthcoming from Dalkey Archive. And next to me is Szecsi Noemi. Szecsi was born in 1976 and is one of the new generation of Hungarian authors. Her debut novel, The Finno-Ugrian Vampire, first brought her to the attention of the public and critics and was the best-selling book in Hungary in 2011. Her latest novel is The Restless, and she lives in Budapest. So welcome to Visible Cities, Invisible Cities, the title of which comes from the Calvino novel. In today's discussion, we will talk about the ways that writers depict place, specifically urban places. In the novels of many writers, a city, or at least a neighborhood in a city, can become as important as a character in the book. I'm thinking of the Dublin of James Joyce, New York of Edith Wharton, the Berlin of Robert Walser. Cities can be sites of upheaval, liberation, and limitation. In some cases, particularly in books that depict gentrification and population displacement, they can be all these things at once. But even in the most rapidly changing cities, a sense of history persists, even if it has been covered over by layers of paint. And it's this interplay between the surfaces of cities and the hidden parts, the less obvious things that a book has to dig a bit at to reveal, that I want to explore today, at least at the beginning. And I thought I would start off with Michal, because your book, The Other City, is very much about this. I think it takes place in Prague, but almost immediately in the book, the narrator finds an obscure text that opens up numerous other worlds to him, things that one wouldn't normally find while walking the streets of that city. I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, about the interplay of the real Prague that you live in and the sort of fantastical, surreal spaces that you open up in that book.
Yes, I tried to count all cities I was writing about, and I counted, I think it was about 21 real cities and 10 imaginary cities. So, and I'm not sure that it's precise. Maybe it's more, but I think for me the city is it's not only a background of story. I think that I can say that maybe the city is a sort of hero. Cities are the heroes of my story. And in my writing, there were two periods, and in the book you were talking about the other city. It's from the first period when I wrote almost only about Prague, and then in the second period I saw some that I wanted some change, and writing about Prague became a sort boring for me. So I started to write about other cities, as I said, real cities and imaginary cities. And so for me is the city very important for that reason that some experience with some place in the city stays at the very beginning of my writing. So, for instance, that book, the other city, the beginning was when I was walking in Prague, and it was winter, and I was walking in a little Prague square, whose name is Pohořelec, and it was covered with snow. I had a feeling that the place is a scene of some stories which are hidden in that space, and that they want that I have to unroll that stories which was present at that space. And in a similar way, also other my novels began. For instance, my last novel takes place in Paris, and so the beginning of the novel was when I was in Paris. It was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and I found there's two places which also seemed to me that there were some stories hidden at that places that I must unroll that stories from the place. So I write very often about magic and fantastic places, and many people think that I take my images from my dreams, but actually all that fantastic and all that imaginary cities were arisen of real experience with real cities, and I think it's a sort of magic which is hidden in every place in the city, and so I think that that sort of fantasy which is founded in real places, for me is more more interesting than some I don't know, some stories which are also without that connection with real places.
Thanks. Barbara, I wanted to ask you, in a similar vein, one of the sections of your novel, Where We Came From, it describes a character flying into Istanbul, and it's a very sort of evocative portrayal of, this is a woman who hasn't been there for a while, and she's sort of considering some of the radical changes that she sees that have occurred since she was there last. And so there's this kind of obvious surface quality to what she's describing, but she's meeting a friend there, and to sort of discuss and remember something that is somewhat factually questionable, hidden from the public eye. And so I wanted to ask you if you had something similar to talk about that, and also just in terms of the changes of the city. These two characters sort of trying to remember what it was like before it changed. And so I'm just kind of wondering about the interplay between past and present in that book.
Well, Istanbul is my adopted main capital, and it is this since the 60s when I was first there. But when I say Istanbul, I mean Byzance, I mean Constantinople, and I mean Istanbul. And this conglomerate of cultures and times has a very magic point. I mean, all these layers being laid upon from time, there always came a new layer. And these two women, well, I just say a few words to them because otherwise I would have to tell the whole novel, and that's just not true and not to do. But these two women lost their partners at an accident or murder. It never turned out what really happened. And they make a ritual every year. They meet in Istanbul and try to see their partners again in a magic way. That's the sense of the ritual. But on the other hand, in this novel, Istanbul has also really the function of talking about change. And I don't know any city in the world, well, I haven't been to all of them, never to Mexico or so on. But in my experience, Istanbul is the city that changed most. When I went there for the first time in 1960, it had 1.2 million inhabitants, like Vienna. Now it has 15 million, so you can imagine what really happened there. And for me, it's a kind of effigy, a symbol for the world, for our world of today. And many people come from these countries to Europe to get to work there, to live there, and so on. In my novel, it's just the other way around, because the twins, the children of the Austrian woman, they grew up in Istanbul and came back to Austria. So for me, it was a way of talking about migration from another aspect.
Thanks. And Dror, in your novel Kin, I mean, there's it's about a couple that's adopted a child, and about the adoptive father's sort of imagining of what the biological parents, what's become of them. And the thing that struck me about the book is just this sort of this sense that there is this great intimacy and also this great strangeness going on in the book. Strangeness in terms of the fact that this character is imagining these people. And in fact, I think that one of the characters' names is sort of done in brackets, like the name isn't actually there, it's an absence. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and about this sort of sense of the city of being somewhere where you can be very, like, intimate's probably the wrong word, but very close to someone who you have absolutely no idea who it is. So I think that that's, like, in terms of visible and invisible, that's kind of what I came away from your book with.
Maybe I'll refer to what just happened about 15 minutes ago, because for me, that's the very essence of what a city is. I mean, there was a fire here without flames and smoke, but something happened. It was, I mean, it took us all by surprise. And for me, a city is a place where such things happen and can happen. These things cannot or hardly can happen in a country village. I mean, sitting like that in public and then being out in the street and then coming back and starting all over again. And what I find interesting in writing about cities is trying to find a literary equivalent to these events. I mean, to try to write sentences in which fire will break in the middle of the sentence. Now, it doesn't have to be fire. It can be anything, but I'm talking about surprise and even a sense of danger that city is based on, I think, and country life less so. Yes, I think this combination of, you called it intimacy and sort of anxiety about the public life, that's the basic structure of a city, because you live inside and outside all the time. You interchange between the inside and the outside. So, yes.
Thanks. That's interesting to say inside and outside of time, because, Noemi, your book is about vampires living in Budapest. And so, I mean, I think that there's an obvious sort of visible and invisible sort of aspect to that. It's sort of, they're living in this hidden world, but also in a visible world. And also, history is kind of, there are many sort of layers of history. One of the characters is more than 200 years old. And so, I'm just wondering how that sort of, how did you think of that in terms of the city? Like, how did Budapest sort of factor into that visible and invisible world that you were creating?
Well, maybe the idea of Budapest being a capital of vampires originated from the idea I had in my childhood that Budapest is a very bloody city. I mean, the scenes of
Microphone.
Scenes of very bloody events, revolutions and wars. At least 3 revolutions took place in Budapest, and of course it was bombed. And as a child, I was always confronted with the idea of blood sacrifice, and which is a very important metaphor in Hungarian history, that we gave our blood for something. And of course, the idea of the vampire and the victim came this way. So that's why I constructed a story based on a prestigious Budapest vampire dynasty. But of course, it's a satire. So it was meant to be funny, and it uses vampires only as metaphors.
Right, right. I mean, the vampires are very urbane too, in a way. One of them works at a publishing company, and they're all very.
Publishers are vampires.
Not Dalki.
I wanted to talk about the city in terms of, I mean, and maybe this is kind of a two-part question, but you know, I talked a little bit about the city being a character at the beginning, but I mean, one thing about cities, well, a very simplistic way of looking at cities is they're mapped out, and they are in flux, but they're a grid in certain ways. But a character in a novel obviously is malleable, and I'm wondering if you approach the city as something that's a backdrop against which your characters, you know, live their lives, or if there's actually some sort of play between the narrative and the city itself. So I mean, I guess I'm wondering if the city is actually kind of, Dror, as you were saying, there's like this element of surprise in the city, which is something that a character, you know, can accomplish too. So I was just wondering if you, when you're writing about the city, if you're looking at it as something that's sort of a stable thing, or if you're actually sort of affecting it with your novels, with your fiction.
Yeah, well, cities are not stable, of course. I think the most prominent thing about a city is maybe two things. One is the multiplicity, and the other is the constant change they are going through. I mean, I've been to New York last time 16 years ago, and the city is enormously changed in little details. Like, for example, I've been to a restaurant around the corner here, and I've noticed that the plates became very small. When I was in New York, I'm serious, when I was in New York in 1997, I remember that the plates were huge. We just couldn't finish off our meals. And now I think maybe because of some kind of a health revolution that the Western society is going through, the meals became very, very small. But maybe that's a false observation. I mean, I'm just referring to a specific restaurant. But the more important thing for me is that you were talking about Istanbul. Maybe we can add another detail to that, because Istanbul is one of the largest cities on earth, but beneath it there's a very dangerous rift, and Istanbul is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. Every day, I mean every hour, a large earthquake can take place there. So underneath this city, this thing that we call a city, there's something that is always going on and always on the move, and it can always happen. It's true about Budapest as well. I mean, Budapest, as you well know, the name Budapest is combined by two cities. So there is a rift in Budapest, but on the surface. And I think in Prague that's true as well, because of the Pragian writer, which is of course Kafka. I mean, when I was walking in Prague and I saw the castle, you cannot look at Prague without thinking about Kafka's books. So a city is always on the move, and for me that's the most interesting thing about it. Again, in very small details, like if you walk even here in New York and look closely at some of the stones that the buildings are made of, you could see that there are little sea creatures inside those stones, inside sandstones, to be more precise, because sandstone is composed of shells of tiny creatures who died millions of years ago. So when you look at a city in that kind of look, you can see that what seems solid and I mean, what seems like an object, the city as an object, is not so. It's just a moment in a very continuous event that started who knows when. I mean, at the beginning of time and will end somewhere in the future, in the far future.
You
Yeah.
want to comment on that, Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, in Istanbul, even the Bosporus has two rivers, the one going up, the
That's
one
right.
down, so it's really shifting. You have the feeling, and sometimes I'm a little bit scared because I was there when twice when there was an earthquake. Of course, it was not that bad. And the funny thing is, you forget it the next day. Now I was remembering when you talked about, you know. But for me, all these cities are a symbol of change, of course, but I was born on the countryside in a small village in the middle of Austria, at the Lake District. And for me, all these cities are aliens in some way. But in the other way, I always had the desire to go there, to explore them, to find out about these layers of culture and of magic and so on. And I spent quite a lot of time in Budapest because when I was studying in Hungary, I was studying in Debrecen, but we went up almost every other weekend to Budapest. And as you said, Buda and Pest, it's two cities. And the Turks had been there too. So all these cities are somehow connected with each other. I mean, it's Vienna, it's Budapest, it's Bucharest, it's Istanbul. And in some way, they have different languages, but in one way, they are bound together in a certain way. Because even with enemies, you get related after so and so many wars, like the Turkish and the Ottoman and the Habsburg Empire. There were many bondages, and that something like translation that was really needed for all these wars too came to birth was by Maria Theresia, because she founded a so-called academy. It was called for Sprachknaben. That meant language boys, because the students of this academy had to be only 12 or 13. They never took Rückert, the famous poet, in this academy because he was too old with 18 years. And there these boys were really educated like the Sängerknaben, only they didn't sing, but they learned Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, and so on. And this, out of this grew a certain culture, a translation culture. And I think if you look closer, all these bondages always interested me a lot.
Right. I'll just jump in. And the issue of translation, you know, I mean, place is usually, you know, attached to a language. And I'm wondering, since all four of you are not writing in English, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about translation and how the language you're writing in affects your work. And Noemi, I think that you have there's an interesting aspect to your novel, which is help me out here, Hungarian has no gendered pronoun for the main character. And so what was a character that was neither male nor female in the original is actually, I think it's been rendered as female in the he or she has been rendered female in the English text.
Actually, Hungarian is a very interesting language in Europe because in Europe there are mainly Germanic and Slavic languages. They are spoken, and there are only 3 Finno-Ugrian languages are spoken in Europe. It's one of the biggest language group is Hungarian, and then Finnish and Estonian. It is a language family, which is and it is very interesting that while Finnish and Estonian are quite close to each other, so they can almost understand each other in certain cases, Hungarian is completely different. But it is the same for all Finno-Ugrian languages, that there is no gender, so there is no gendered pronoun, so there is no he and she in Finno-Ugrian languages. And of course, this aspect of the novel is, this Finno-Ugrian aspect of the novel is that, first of all, I actually wrote the novel in Helsinki and not in Budapest. A Budapest novel written in another Finno-Ugrian capital, and the other that when I studied Finnish language at the University of Helsinki, I read Finnish short stories and novels where there was no gendered narrator. So when the narrator told the story, you couldn't deduct if he's or she is a female or a male. And I got interested in this experiment, so I started to experiment with this kind of narrator in this story. I don't know how successful it was, but anyway, it's a kind of experiment for me, because I could do it in a Finno-Ugrian language.
Right, right. You know, I wanted to ask the inverse of the question I asked, or kind of the inverse of the question I asked before, which is, does a writer affect a city by writing about it? Does a writer change a city by writing about it? I'm wondering how much the city affects your writing. I mean, you can talk about that in terms of structure. The way I was thinking about it is, you know, all of your books have a very sort of specific sense of place. How would they change if they were somewhere else? Could they work somewhere else? It's kind of a hypothetical question, but Michal, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, maybe I want to say something to the translation.
Please
so
do.
For me, it's interesting to read my books in English, because I think the spirit of the English is very different of the spirit of Czech, and I'm used to writing in long sentences, and the Czech has also long words with suffixes and prefixes and all that, and so in English there are short words, short sentences. So the rhythm of the language is very different. Yeah, but. Yes, I don't think that it's bad. I think that it's a new aspect, and for me it's something new and some new aspect of what I said, and I think it's good that the different languages have a different spirits, and that. So they can show the different aspects of the text, and that it's that they enrich the text. And about novel, I don't know. I think there are many novelists that they hate city, and that they write about cities, that they feel the city is their enemy, yeah, because city it's a place of alienation and so, and the true life is in the country, and Martin Heidegger wrote that there is no real closeness or near in the city, that you cannot be near to somebody in the city, unlike when you are in the country. but of course it's partially it's true. But on the other hand, that the fact that we meet in the streets in the city unknown people, it's also not only cause of some alienation. It's also an adventure and reason for fantasy. We can imagine all that lives of that unknown people. We can try to read their lives they passed from their faces and from the ways they move on the street. And so there is a nice story by E.T.A. Hoffmann that about a man who is living in a flat in the city, in the square, and it is in, I don't know, in some high level, and he lives at the window and looks down and imagine lives of all that people he sees from the window. Yeah, so the city. All that thing that in the city there is a very narrow horizon. We see only to the next corner, and we don't see sky. And the city is full of closed or semi-closed spaces. So somebody can feel alienated, but all that is all that may be something which from all that the imagination is emerging, and we can imagine what happened in the flats and in that closed spaces. So I think that that structure of narrow horizon, and that we in city we don't know what we will see behind the corner, that it's very in a way it's similar to the structure of the novel. Yeah, we also don't know what will be after several pages, and some unexpected beginning of a story may come. So I think that for that reason, the city and the novel are something which is connected, and maybe it's from the first European novel, which is, if I'm not mistaken, Satyricon by Petronius.
Thanks. Yeah, I did want to move on to that question that I sort of brought up earlier. Just the sort of flip side of the idea that the writer sort of constructs an image of the city while writing, and that city is somewhat malleable in the writer's hands. But there are certain aspects of the city as a shared experience, and I'm wondering how particular aspects of the city have sort of affected your narratives. And I guess another way to look at that would be to wonder whether the books that you've written about cities, how they would change if they were set in another city. I don't know if you want to sort of go down that hypothetical path, but I am curious about how the sort of set structures of the city have affected the narrative of your books and the sort of qualities of your books. Do you want to start, Dror?
Sure. It's very interesting because I find that every time I go abroad, and including this time, I immediately return to be a poet, which is the genre I started with. I cannot write prose outside of my country and outside of my house. And something more inwardly rises inside when I'm not home. And it's a very great experience for me because my greatest aspiration is to stop writing prose and at last to write only poetry, which is, I mean, the only thing that worth writing after all. And I mean, it happened yesterday. I wrote it, I already know it's going to happen. I just landed, got into the hotel around the corner, the Standard, a beautiful hotel, and opened the curtain, and there it was, New York City, and I sat there on the bed in front of this beautiful skyline and wrote a poem. Yes, I couldn't, I don't believe I could have written anything else but poetry in another place, let alone to write about other cities. Yeah.
Well, I think, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still a prose writer, and but the rhythm changes. I have the feeling whenever and wherever I go, something is writing in me, and the writing in me didn't turn to poetry in New York, but the rhythm changed. And but I wanted to say something to Noemi, because in Turkish there's a very similar situation, and I am convinced, knowing both languages, that they are much more related with each other, as the scientists, the philologists in the 19th century wanted to be them. So I think that Finno-Ugric thing is a construction, and it might have been the other way around too. But what fascinates me in cities like Istanbul, and there my prose writing gets very quickly, very quick, is the sturdiness with which they resist being deplaced. I mean, Ataturk decided in the 20s to make Ankara the capital. And now Ankara is the capital, but still Istanbul is the main city, and I mean, it will never change. No matter how often you change its name or change its role in politics. And for me, coming from outside, I really try to sharpen my ears to the rhythm that's born in me the moment I go to these cities. And maybe sometimes they will turn poetry too, but not yet.
We'll wait.
Michal, do you want to respond to that question, or?
So about poetry, I began as my first book was a book of poetry, and the topic of the book was also a city, was Prague. But then it happened that all that images sort of from that images began to stories began to arise from that images, and the images changed into stories, and I forgot how to write poems. And of course there is a sort of poetry in writing about the cities, because when you are writing about the city, you have to feel the unique tone or unique mode of the city, which is a kind of kind of poetry, and I think that that's a very nice and famous pages in Marcel Proust when he remembered that his days of childhood in Combray, after he smelled the tea with that Madeleine, and it also, I think that it also shows the connection between city and poetry, and maybe also with memory, because when I want to write about the city has to emerge from memory, because when I am living in the city, so there are many different experiences, and when I want to feel the unique tone of the city, his poetry, it emerges in memory, I think.
Well, no poetry for me. I have never written poems, but as for a story taking place in another city, I have written 3 novels about Budapest, and now I gave it up. My 5th novel, which is about a deaf boy, well, it takes place in an imaginary city, because in my first 3 novels, I always had to talk about my ambivalent relationship with the city, which is in my case Budapest. Maybe if I could, if I had another living place, another city where I lived, then I could have written about that also, but Budapest was my city. And then I wrote a novel about emigrants and drifting in Europe, about different cities, but now I have arrived to this completely nameless imaginary city. So that's the way of development for me.
Thanks. I'd like to ask a question about, Dror has these sort of wonderful set pieces in his novel, Kin, about the city following an ice age. And I believe that no one's there, and it's just sort of growing over with moss and stuff like that. But most of our depictions of cities they're crowded, they're multicultural. It's really difficult to see sometimes how someone would find focus in a city. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that a little bit, how you sort of narrowed your portrait of the city to make it actually recognizable, because in a sense it's impossible to capture.
Yeah, I've been using in the last couple of days here in New York this great application called Google Maps. And you have to get from point A to point B, and it tells you you should walk 5 minutes from here to a bus station, and then take a bus and drive 3 more minutes, and then get off the bus and go down to the subway, and then walk another 5 minutes, and you're there. And this is a thing that is relevant only in a big city. And I think Michal has told that 5 minutes ago, and I want to maybe rephrase that, because what a writer can take from a city is exactly this multi-rhythmness. You were talking about the rhythm of the city, but as you can see from this simple example, there are, even if within a small walk of about 15 minutes, there are at least 3 or 4 very different rhythms. I mean, the rhythm of the subway, and the rhythm of the bus, and the rhythm of walking, and the rhythm of sitting on a bench. And if you can kind of translate those multi-rhythmness into your text, then maybe you could not describe a city realistically because it's too big to be described, but you can transfer to the reader something of this multi-rhythmness, as I called it, within your sentences. And that's the thing that any writer can take from city and transplant it to another city. I mean, even after a week in New York, I think you can hear these complicated music and maybe use it while describing another city that you know better, like your own city.
Well, in 2008, I published a novel that took place in Cairo. And the novel's title was Forget Egypt. But it was not meant to forget Egypt. It's a quotation from the female guru I used for this novel. And she said, "Oh, forget Egypt. Look at the Egyptians." Because in cities like Cairo, you're always lured and tempted to talk about the past, about all the pyramids and all the king's graves and I don't know what, because it's so dominant and overwhelming. And so I really tried to bring myself to look closer at the people. And of course, since my Arabic got lost in the run of the years, I had to study Arabic when I was a student, but it was just lost in the last 50 years. So I needed a guru, and this was a very good girlfriend of mine. And I really tried to look with her eyes and to get a sense for these millions of people that crowd the streets of Cairo. And in reality, you don't know who they are, what their history is, what their story is, what they are up to. But if you look at them, the longer the better. And the more you get the rhythm in which they walk, something shines up in your head that explains the city to yourself, and that was the point where I could start. I mean, finding the rhythm of the ordinary people being there, confronted with this load of history every day, and with every step they walk. Because if you would scratch a little bit, some antiquity would show up. So there are cities that are almost strangled by their cultural history, and I think Cairo is one of them, but still it was so interesting that I couldn't do without writing it, not a book about it, but writing Cairo, just to understand myself where I had gone to 5 times in my life.
Yes, I think I know what are you talking about, because his story is, in my eyes, a big problem for Prague. Prague is a historical city, and also people say that it's a magic city or such adjectives, but it's, history of Prague now became sort of industry for tourists, yeah, and that so-called magic of Prague is something similar now, and you can buy in Prague the T-shirt with Kafka and Golem and I don't know what, and many tourists buy them really. So when I read my first book of poems and my short stories, and that first 2 novels I wrote about Prague, and then I finished it because I began sort of hate this Prague magic, because I think that it's very it's a sort of cheap magic, yes. And then I turned to other places. I wrote about Prague also, but not about the historical center, about the typical magic Prague, but about Prague periphery and industrial zones and so on. And there is fantastic magic of that places of Prague also, where you cannot meet any tourist there. And so then I write also about other places, but I want to say that that's history and magic, and also the places which are too much beautiful, that it's not good for a novel, I think. Yeah, and when I as I said, that I began to write my novels in certain places. So now they are not the places which are historical or beautiful. It's places, some on the periphery of cities, and so.
Well, I was just thinking about that here in New York. I had the idea that people living there all came from different cities, and sometimes they have bad memories in connection with those cities because they were frustrating for them, and that's why they came to New York, or their families. For example, yesterday I met a lady, an artist, and she told me that her mother came from Hungary, and but she and I asked her, of course, if she wants to go to Hungary to visit Hungary, and she said to me that never ever, because she's angry with the Hungarians and with Hungary, because her mother's family was killed during the Holocaust. And many people living here in New York has this frustrating memory in connection with other cities, like because of politics, because of history, because of poverty, and things like that. And this was the most intense feeling I had here in connection with cities, that all people came here from frustrating cities to be happy here or not.
Maybe. So I know that we're running short on time. We have to be out of here at 6:30 on the dot. So I wanted to open this up to the audience. Does anyone in the audience have questions? Yes, you over here.
Yes, I'd like to ask Dror. I've had the same experience about being in other cities and wanting to write poetry in a way that I've done as I'm living here. Why do you think what do you think that difference consists of? What causes the difference?
I think it's very simple, because you, once you're in a new place and it's a strange place to you, you naturally turn inside into your own inner world. And that's where poetry comes from. That's my experience. I mean, I'm not trying to theorize that, but yeah.
Yes.
I don't have an example because I don't have the book right here, but I think the aim of I think my aim in writing prose sentences is that a sentence that begins at a certain tone and place would change from within, somewhere in the middle. And so there is a sense of a drama, not in what the sentence depicts or in the semantic level, but in the musical or even in the choice of words inside the sentence. So you can think about it like a line in a painting. I mean, the line in itself can be a very interesting thing that goes through a certain drama while being developed, and that when that happens in a sentence, I feel that maybe the sentence is beautiful, or I don't know, and maybe it's right. It's not boring. Yes.
Any other questions? Yes.
So how does that work when your work is translated? How can you be sure that when it goes to another language, it still has the rhythm that you envisioned?
It doesn't. It doesn't. It just, most of the time, it's been lost in translation.
Anyone else? All right. I want to thank everyone for a wonderful conversation. Thanks to everyone for coming here this afternoon. I'm sorry about the interruption. Please be sure to check out the table of books as you leave. And I think that some of the writers will be outside to sign books in the lobby. So thank you and have a great day.